Welcome, the anointed ones. The truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up with receipts, timestamps, and a look that says, "You should have left earlier." Here's the uncomfortable part no one warns you about. Most people don't walk away because they finally got clarity. They walk away because the full story eventually leaks. Through patterns, contradictions, side comments that don't add up, and moments where the mask slips just long enough to make your stomach drop. Not in a dramatic movie scene way, in a quiet, unsettling, "Oh, that explains everything" way. There's a documented psychological fact that stays buried under politeness. Once people are invested in a version of events that benefits them, they will protect that version even when it requires distorting reality, not lying once, not exaggerating here and there, fully re-editing history. That's not emotional immaturity, that's narrative control. And the people who do this the cleanest are often the ones who smile the most and swear they just want peace. Funny how peace always seems to require your silence, your patience, and your memory getting a little fuzzy. This is why, when the truth finally surfaces, the reaction isn't sadness, it's rage mixed with clarity. Not because you're emotional, but because you realize how long you were unknowingly participating in a story that wasn't yours. You weren't confused, you were managed. You weren't sensitive, you were strategically kept out of the loop. And the worst part? You can trace the moment it started, usually right after they realized you had boundaries, a brain, and the ability to leave. There's also a strange dark humor to it. The same people who told you to let it go were holding meetings about you. The same ones who accused you of overthinking had spreadsheets in their head tracking your reactions. You thought you were in a relationship, a family dynamic, or a friendship. Turns out, you were a case study. No lab coat, just vibes and manipulation. This isn't about bitterness or drama. It's about what happens when context finally catches up with experience. Because if you actually knew the full story, the conversations you weren't invited to, the motives behind the mixed signals, the way your kindness was quietly filed under usable resources, cutting them off wouldn't feel impulsive. It would feel like correcting the record, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's when distance stops feeling cruel and starts feeling accurate. Number one, they didn't misunderstand you, they rewrote you. At some point, the story about you stopped being about what actually happened and started being about what was convenient. You didn't suddenly become difficult, cold, or selfish. That version of you was edited into existence. Piece by piece, your words were trimmed, your intentions were twisted, and your reactions were shown without the context that caused them. What people ended up hearing wasn't a lie in the obvious sense. It was worse. It was a believable remix. This is how it works. They take one moment where you were tired and present it as your personality. One boundary you set becomes proof that you're hard to deal with. One time you spoke up gets framed as you being aggressive or dramatic. Meanwhile, everything that pushed you to that point is quietly erased. The pressure, the disrespect, the pattern of behavior that forced your hand, gone. You're left holding the label while they walk away, looking reasonable. What makes this especially unsettling is that it's usually done calmly. No yelling, no chaos, just steady repetition. The same phrases used over and over until people stop questioning them. And once that version of you circulates, correcting it feels pointless because you're not fighting one person anymore. You're fighting a story that's already been accepted as truth. You may have noticed how certain people only understand you when it benefits them. In private, they know exactly who you are. They rely on your clarity, your loyalty, your consistency. But in public, that understanding disappears. Suddenly, you're misinterpreted, too much, or not the same anymore. That switch isn't confusion, it's strategy. It allows them to keep access to you while damaging your credibility. The hardest part to accept is this. Once someone benefits from a distorted version of you, they have no incentive to correct it. Fixing the story would mean admitting their role in creating it. So they double down instead. They act confused when you pull away. They say you changed. They say they don't know what went wrong, but you do. And deep down, they do too. The moment you stop trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding, you is the moment the power shifts back where it belongs. Number 2, your kindness became their alibi. The most painful truth is that your generosity and patience weren't just overlooked. They were weaponized. Every time you forgave, every time you explained, every time you bent over backward to make things smoother, they saw it as proof that they could get away with almost anything. Your grace didn't just go unappreciated, it became their excuse. See, they're fine, they'd think, so nothing we're doing really matters. And that's the trap. Your kindness, the very thing that made you human, became the tool that allowed them to continue testing, crossing, and pushing boundaries without consequence. It's subtle. They don't come at you with open hostility all the time. That would be obvious. Instead, they rely on your good heart to normalize behavior that should have set off alarms. Missed promises, your understanding covers it. Disrespect, your patience smooths it. Lies? Your willingness to forgive fills in the gaps. You think you're giving them mercy. In reality, you're giving them a pass to keep showing you who they really are while convincing themselves they're not doing anything wrong. The irony is cruel. They feed off your hope that your kindness signals moral superiority, thinking it keeps you on their side. They treat your loyalty like a safety net, forgetting that nets don't hold forever. Eventually they cross the line so many times in so many ways that even your patience begins to crack. That's when the truth becomes undeniable. Your grace wasn't just ignored, it was exploited. Once you see it, there's no going back. That same compassion you once freely gave becomes a reminder of how strategically it was used against you. And in that realization lies the liberation. No one can use your kindness as an alibi once you stop handing it out blindly. The moment you take it back, you stop being a participant in their manipulation and start being a guardian of your own dignity. The power shifts quietly, almost invisibly, but it's absolute. Your kindness stops being their excuse and starts being your strength. Number 3, they knew exactly when to stop before being exposed. One of the most unsettling truths is how calculated everything felt once you start paying attention. The hurt, the betrayal, the gaslighting, it never happened at random. There was always a pause, a line they never quite crossed, a limit they never exceeded, as if they were measuring your breaking point with a ruler. They weren't careless or reckless, they were precise. Every misstep, every manipulation, every moment of coldness was timed to inflict maximum confusion without ever providing irrefutable proof. And that is where the genius of their control lies. You might remember the countless times you wanted to call them out, wanted to confront the behavior only to hesitate because maybe it wasn't that bad. That hesitation wasn't a coincidence. They counted on it. They studied your reactions, tracked your thresholds, and learned exactly how far they could push before you'd respond. Every argument stopped just before it escalated into something undeniable. Every lie had a thread of truth woven in. Every omission left enough room for doubt. They didn't want you broken. They wanted you questioning, second-guessing, unsure of what was real. The frightening part is realizing how intentional it all was. You weren't just unlucky, you were observed. Your patterns, your patience, the exact moment you'd speak up or stay silent. They mapped it all, almost clinically. And because of that, The manipulation feels invisible until the full picture emerges. By the time you connect the dots, the dynamic has existed for years without you even realizing it. Once you see it, everything changes. You stop blaming yourself for feeling off, for overthinking, for questioning. You understand that the careful pauses, the near misses, the tiny shocks of doubt were never mistakes, they were strategy. And that knowledge is liberating. It's the key to finally removing yourself from a system designed to exploit your patience, your awareness, and your humanity. Recognizing how meticulously they controlled the narrative is the first step in reclaiming your power and stepping out without leaving a trace of doubt behind. Number 4, they fed on your self-doubt more than your success. Your achievements were never the real issue. They clapped, nodded, and even congratulated you when you won. But the energy always felt thin, like applause that ended too quickly. What truly kept them invested wasn't your success. It was the moments when you questioned yourself, the hesitation before you spoke, the second guessing after you set a boundary, the quiet anxiety that asked, "Was I wrong for that?" That's where their comfort lived. When you doubted yourself, they felt powerful, not in an obvious, dramatic way, but in a subtle, steady one. Your uncertainty gave them influence. As long as you weren't fully convinced of your own judgment, they could step in as the voice of reason, the interpreter of events, the one who understood the situation better than you. They didn't need to be smarter or stronger. They just needed you unsure. That's why your confidence made them restless. Every time you trusted your instincts without checking in with them, something shifted. Their advice became more frequent, their tone more corrective. They disguised control as concern. They framed doubt as humility and certainty as arrogance. Slowly, you learned to question yourself before they even had to. That was the goal. What makes this especially damaging is how invisible it feels while it's happening. Self-doubt doesn't arrive screaming. It creeps in quietly, dressed as self-awareness, growth, or maturity. You start replaying conversations in your head, wondering if you misunderstood, if you were too sensitive, if you should have handled it differently. Meanwhile, they sit comfortably in the background, benefiting from a version of you that hesitates instead of stands firm. Your success never threatened them because they assumed it was temporary or manageable. Your clarity did. A person who trusts themselves is no longer easy to guide, correct, or contain. That's why the dynamic begins to fall apart the moment you stop asking for permission to believe yourself. When your inner voice gets louder than theirs, the influence disappears. The shift is subtle but permanent. Once you recognize that your self-doubt was never natural, it was cultivated, you stop feeding the dynamic that sustained them. And without that fuel, they lose their grip entirely. Number 5, you were punished for not needing them. The trouble didn't start when you failed or struggled. It started when you proved you could stand on your own, without constantly checking in, asking for approval, or needing permission to move. Independence exposed something uncomfortable in them. As long as you needed their validation, advice, or emotional support, you fit neatly into the role they understood. The moment you didn't, the rules changed. You may have noticed the shift was subtle at first. Support turned into distance. Encouragement became indifference. Small jabs replaced genuine care. They didn't announce the punishment. They delivered it quietly. Access was reduced. Warmth was withheld. You weren't told what you did wrong because saying it out loud would have revealed the truth. You stopped being dependent, and that made you uncontrollable. Needing them gave them purpose and leverage. It made them feel important, relevant, even superior. Your growth threatened that structure. When you stopped leaning on them, they had two choices: grow with you or try to pull you back down. Pulling you back was easier. So they questioned your decisions, doubted your motives, and subtly framed your independence as selfishness or arrogance. Not because it was true, but because it softened the discomfort of no longer being central to your life. What hurts most is realizing you didn't become distant. You became self-sufficient, and instead of being proud, they felt replaced. That resentment doesn't always show up as anger. Often it looks like coldness, passive-aggressive comments, or sudden disinterest in things that once mattered. They wanted you close enough to rely on them, but not strong enough to outgrow them. Once you see this pattern, everything clicks. The tension wasn't about conflict or misunderstanding. It was about power. Independence removes leverage. A person who doesn't need you can't be controlled through guilt, fear, or approval. That's why your autonomy was treated like betrayal. The moment you stop internalizing their reaction is the moment the punishment loses its sting. You realize their discomfort was never your responsibility. You didn't abandon them. You simply stopped shrinking to keep them comfortable. Number 6, they studied your patterns to predict your breaking point. From the very beginning, nothing about their behavior was accidental. Every word, every pause, every subtle jab was carefully measured against how you reacted. They didn't just notice your emotions, they catalogued them. They learned which triggers made you defensive, which silences made you uneasy, and which moments of patience would make you forgive too quickly. Over time, this wasn't casual observation. It was a strategy, a quiet, relentless study designed to map your limits without you realizing it. It's exhausting to recognize, but once you do, it explains so much. Those moments when you thought, "I can't believe they just did that," weren't mistakes. They were experiments. Every small test of your patience, every push against a boundary, was designed to see how far you could be stretched before snapping, speaking out, or walking away. And just when you approached your limit, they'd step back, leaving enough room for you to doubt yourself. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I'm too sensitive, you'd think, completely unaware that the behavior was intentionally calculated to make you question your own judgment. The frightening part is how precise it all is. There's a rhythm to it, a consistency that you can only see in hindsight. It's why chaos never felt completely chaotic. There's a method to what seems like randomness, and once you recognize the method, the entire dynamic becomes terrifyingly clear. They weren't testing you for fun. They were ensuring control. They were learning exactly how much tension they could create, how many boundaries they could push, and how long it would take for you to react. Once you understand that they weren't acting impulsively, that they were strategically monitoring, predicting, and adjusting their behavior based on your reactions, everything changes. You stop blaming yourself for being too sensitive or too reactive. You see that the power dynamic was never about mistakes or misunderstandings. It was about leverage. And once you see the map they drew around you, you realize you don't have to stay inside it anymore. The moment you step out, the game they've been carefully controlling loses its rules, and the power shifts entirely back to you. Number 7, the version of you they describe only exists in rooms you're not in. What makes this one sting is how consistent it is. Face to face, everything seems manageable. They understand you just fine. They laugh with you, rely on you, even praise you when it suits them. But the moment you're not present, a different version of you appears. Suddenly you're difficult, dramatic, changed, or hard to deal with. Not because you transformed, but because the room did. That version of you isn't born from confusion, it's created for convenience. In rooms where you can't defend yourself, nuance disappears. Context is stripped away. Your reactions are told without the behavior that caused them. Your boundaries are mentioned, but never the disrespect that made them necessary. What's left is a simplified character that makes everyone else feel comfortable with how they treated you. This tactic serves a purpose. It allows them to keep benefiting from you while quietly weakening your credibility. When your name comes up, the tone is already set. If you speak later, you sound defensive. If you pull away, you confirm the story they planted. Either way, the narrative works in their favor. What's unsettling is how calm they are about it. No anger, no chaos, just casual storytelling. A sigh here, a you know how they are there. Over time, that repetition hardens into truth for people who were never there to see the full picture. And once that version of you settles in, correcting it feels exhausting. Not because you're wrong, but because you're outnumbered by a story told without you. You may notice they act surprised when you distance yourself. They claim they don't know what happened. That confusion is part of the act. Acknowledging the private version of the story would mean admitting they helped shape it. The clarity comes when you realize something important. You don't owe access to people who benefit from misrepresenting you. You don't need to chase rooms where your absence is used as permission to rewrite you. Walking away isn't avoidance. It's refusing to participate in a version of yourself that was never true to begin with. Number 8, they needed you reactive, not aware. The entire dynamic wasn't built on chaos for chaos's sake. It was built on your reactions. As long as you were confused, emotional, or defensive, they held the upper hand. Every slight, every ambiguous comment, every contradiction wasn't accidental. It was designed to provoke a response, to keep you on edge, to make you expend energy on defending yourself instead of seeing the truth. Awareness would have destroyed the control they had, so they had to keep you just unsettled enough to stay engaged, but never fully aware enough to break free. They relied on your emotional energy as fuel. The more you questioned, argued, or replayed scenarios in your mind, the more power they gained without lifting a finger. When you were reacting, you weren't noticing the pattern. You weren't noticing how small inconsistencies formed a web of manipulation. You weren't noticing that you were being studied and predicted. Reactivity was their insurance policy. Awareness, on the other hand, was a threat. Once you saw through the subtle pushes, the half-truths, and the calculated pauses, their influence began to crumble. And the brilliance, if you can call it that, is how invisible it all felt. No one shouted, no one confronted you openly. They didn't need to. A raised eyebrow, a carefully chosen word, a delay in response, or a subtle contradiction was enough to keep you second-guessing. The manipulation was surgical, not sloppy. You spent all your energy trying to fix the surface, while the structure beneath continued to shape the reality you were allowed to see. Eventually, the mask slips when your clarity grows stronger than their control. You start recognizing the pattern, seeing how every emotional spike was manufactured. That's when everything changes. Once you stop being reactive and start being aware, their carefully curated influence disappears. The games end because they relied on your participation, and you finally refuse to play. Awareness becomes armor. The moment you stop reacting just to survive, you reclaim the space they've been trying to dominate for far too long. And in that reclamation lies freedom, the kind of freedom that can't be argued with, manipulated, or stolen. Number 9, your boundaries exposed their intentions. The moment you set a line, made a demand for respect, or said no, everything changed. Not because you were being unreasonable, but because your boundaries revealed the truth they'd been hiding. Up until that point, the manipulation could be masked, the narrative controlled, the truth conveniently blurred. But boundaries are like light in a dark room. Suddenly, everything they were trying to keep hidden is visible. Your simple act of self-respect stripped away the illusions they'd built around you and everyone else. Before you spoke up, their behavior thrived on ambiguity. They could twist words, shift blame, and reinterpret events without consequence. Your silence, patience, and tolerance worked like a fog, softening every sharp edge of their intentions. But the moment you drew a line, the fog lifted. Your clarity made their hidden motives undeniable. What had been subtle gaslighting or passive manipulation suddenly became obvious exploitation. Your boundaries didn't just protect you, they acted as a mirror, reflecting the truth back at them and anyone watching. And that's why the reaction is always so revealing. They rarely apologize or explain. Instead, they resist, push back, or escalate. That response isn't about you, it's about the exposure. Your boundary proves that they were never acting in good faith, and that realization is threatening to anyone relying on secrecy or subtle control. They show their colors the moment your expectations for respect and fairness interrupt their narrative. Once you recognize this, everything shifts. Boundaries are no longer just rules for yourself. They are diagnostic tools, revealing character and intention in ways words alone cannot. They separate those who respect your existence from those who want to rewrite it to fit their convenience. And the best part is, setting them doesn't require anger or confrontation. It's quiet, firm, and unapologetic. It's simple. You define the space you will occupy, and anyone unwilling to respect it shows their true nature instantly. That clarity is invaluable, because once you see it, there's no reason to continue entertaining the people who choose to ignore it. Number 10. They relied on your hope that things would improve. Hope was their silent ally, the invisible leash that kept you tethered longer than logic ever should have allowed. Every time you believed in their promises, forgave a misstep, or imagined a future where things could be different, you were feeding the system that manipulated you. Your hope was treated like currency, not for mutual growth, but as a means to sustain control. The longer you clung to it, the more leverage they had without ever raising a hand or lifting a voice. It wasn't malicious in the obvious sense. They didn't have to be cruel. Your hope did the work for them. They counted on it to smooth over contradictions, justify broken promises, and normalize behavior that should have set off alarms. Every moment of optimism on your side allowed them to continue without challenge, because you believed that change was possible. That belief became a safety net they didn't have to earn. Your hope bought them comfort while costing you clarity, and the insidious part is how subtle it felt. They rarely told you to hang on or wait and see. It was built into interactions, pauses, and reactions. A suggestion here, a small sign of potential there. Each tiny signal was enough to keep the fire of hope alive, making you question your own perception, your patience, and your judgment. While you focused on the possibility of improvement, you missed the pattern, the repetition, and the quiet indifference that defined the real truth. Eventually, hope runs out, and when it does, the realization hits hard. You see that your energy was being harvested, that your belief in better days was the very thing keeping you from stepping away sooner. That's the awakening, understanding that hope isn't inherently bad, but hope in the wrong hands becomes a leash disguised as motivation. Once you recognize this, the dynamic dissolves. The hope that once trapped you becomes a tool of clarity, and you finally see that your freedom starts where their influence ends. And in that clarity, there's no need to return, no need to negotiate, and no need to continue investing in what was never meant to grow. Number 11. You were the emotional regulator for people who refused to regulate themselves. One of the most draining truths is realizing how much of your energy went into stabilizing people who never cared to stabilize themselves. You absorbed tension, smoothed conflicts, and carried the emotional weight they refused to face. Every argument you mediated, every apology you offered, Every calm explanation you gave wasn't just kindness. It was a service they expected for free, and the expectation was never ending. You were the anchor while they floated without responsibility, and over time, that imbalance became invisible to everyone except you. This role doesn't start overnight. It creeps in slowly, disguised as cooperation or teamwork. At first you feel useful, appreciated, or even trusted, but the more you provide the emotional labor, the less they contribute to the balance. Their discomfort, anger, or instability becomes your problem. Your patience becomes a buffer. Your understanding becomes a shield, and your capacity to absorb tension becomes the safety net they refuse to build for themselves. And they act like it's normal, like their reliance is deserved, because you never complained. The most frustrating part is how subtle the manipulation feels. They don't ask for your emotional labor explicitly. It's expected, assumed, and enforced through small comments, passive resistance, or moments of guilt-tripping. You begin to second-guess your own feelings, believing that your frustration is excessive, your boundaries unreasonable, or your need for space selfish. Meanwhile, the pattern continues, quietly sapping your energy while giving them the freedom to act without consequence. The awakening comes when you realize that your role as regulator wasn't required. It was cultivated. You didn't choose to be the one constantly adjusting, calming, and managing. They engineered it by refusing accountability. And the moment you stop participating, the entire dynamic collapses. Your energy is no longer a resource to be mined. You reclaim your balance, your clarity, and your peace, leaving them to face the consequences of their own unregulated emotions. That's when liberation truly begins. When you stop being the unpaid therapist for people who never intended to heal themselves. Number 12, they benefited from you being the bigger person. Being the bigger person isn't always a virtue. Sometimes it's a role they exploit. Every time you swallowed frustration, forgave slights, or held back your voice, you were giving them a gift they didn't earn. Your restraint made life smoother for them, allowed them to avoid confrontation, and gave them a convenient moral cover. Meanwhile, you carried the weight of self-control, emotional labor, and suppressed irritation. Your maturity became their escape hatch, not your advantage. It's subtle, almost invisible. They don't actively say, "Thank you for being reasonable." Instead, they assume it, rely on it, and even manipulate it. You hold back an argument, and they gain space. You step back to maintain peace, and they gain leverage. Every time you rise above pettiness, they benefit from the calm, while avoiding the self-reflection, accountability, or change they should be making. Your choice to act with integrity becomes a one-sided transaction, and often you don't realize it until the pattern is deeply rooted. The danger lies in how it's framed. Being the bigger person makes you feel like the hero, like you're in control of the moral high ground. But the reality is that this position often keeps you vulnerable while others exploit the situation. They rely on your ability to endure, to forgive, to be patient, and to see the bigger picture, all qualities that are admirable. But when unchecked, these very qualities become a tool to maintain imbalance. Once you recognize this, the dynamic shifts. You start understanding that maturity and patience are valuable, but only when respected. Being the bigger person should never come at the expense of your energy, dignity, or truth. The moment you stop being a free moral cushion for others, you reclaim power. Your integrity is no longer a tool for someone else's comfort or manipulation. Instead, it becomes a shield for yourself, a clear boundary between who you are and the people who counted on you to carry what they refuse to confront. That is the turning point where being the bigger person finally benefits the right person, you. Number 13. They weren't afraid of losing you. They were afraid of you telling the truth. It's one of the most overlooked realities. The threat you posed wasn't in leaving, it was in speaking. Every warning, every subtle threat, every manipulation wasn't about keeping you physically present. It was about controlling the narrative. They needed you quiet, hesitant, and unsure because your clarity had the power to dismantle the story they carefully constructed. Your presence was irrelevant. Your voice was dangerous. They counted on silence. They counted on your patience, your attempts to rationalize, and your hope that things would change. All of it made you predictable, manageable, and non-threatening. But the moment you start naming the truth, exposing patterns, or showing others what was really happening, the power flips. That's why subtle gaslighting, contradictions, and passive resistance were constants. They weren't trying to confuse you out of malice. They were trying to prevent you from finding words that would make them accountable. And the cleverness of it lies in how invisible it all seems. They appear calm, reasonable, even hurt by your overreactions. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the real panic is the possibility that you might tell the story as it happened. Your honesty threatens exposure. Your clarity threatens the comfort of the lies they've been living in. The closer you get to unfiltered truth, the more effort they put into containment, manipulation, and misdirection. Once you see it, it changes everything. You realize the fear you thought was about attachment or loss was never about your presence at all. It was about the power of your words, the reality you carried, and the accountability you could demand simply by speaking. And that's the moment control starts to slip from their hands. When you embrace your truth and no longer censor it for their comfort, you reclaim authority. You stop being the quiet participant in their story and start being the voice that defines your own reality. That realization that your words, not your absence, are the true game changer is both liberating and irreversible. Number 14. Cutting them off isn't abandonment. It's refusing to participate in your own distortion. The moment you decide to cut them off, it doesn't feel like drama or revenge. It feels like clarity. For years, you were living inside a story that wasn't yours, edited and rewritten by people who benefited from your confusion. Every misrepresentation, every manipulation, every passive jab became part of a version of reality designed to keep you unsettled, questioning yourself, and constantly proving your worth. Cutting them off isn't cruelty. It's the first act of reclaiming your story. This isn't about anger. It's about accuracy. When you remove yourself from the people who thrive on rewriting your narrative, you stop lending credibility to the distortion. Their version of you collapses because it only exists when you're available for it to exist. Your absence doesn't punish them. It merely removes the fuel that kept their story alive. Without your reactions, your forgiveness, and your patience, the carefully constructed version of you falls apart. That's the power of disengagement. And the truth is liberating. When you finally step away, you realize the years of overthinking, questioning, and apologizing weren't flaws in you. They were features of a system that exploited your presence. Every boundary you set before this moment, every moment of self-restraint, was preparing you for this exact clarity. Cutting them off doesn't erase memories or experiences, but it prevents your energy from being used to reinforce their control. Once you see it this way, the act of walking away becomes sacred. It's a declaration that your reality belongs to you, not to anyone who twisted it to suit convenience. No explanations are required, no apologies necessary. You're simply choosing to live where truth exists and refusing to participate in environments where distortion rules. Cutting them off isn't abandonment. It's alignment. It's the decision to step fully into your own life, untethered from those who profited from bending it, and to honor the clarity, dignity, and power that have always been yours. The truth is often uncomfortable because once you see it, nothing looks the same again. Every manipulation, every subtle jab, every carefully curated version of you suddenly falls into place, and what seemed like confusion or bad luck reveals itself as strategy, calculation, and exploitation. From the moment they rewrote who you were, to the time your kindness became their alibi, to the way your patience and hope were mined as tools against you, it all points to one undeniable reality. You were never the problem. You were the witness, the participant, and eventually the target of a system designed to keep you off balance while they stayed comfortable. But clarity is liberation. Once you recognize the patterns of how they studied your reactions, relied on your hope, thrived on your self-doubt, and feared your truth, you reclaim the power that has always been yours. Boundaries, awareness, independence, and honesty are not just survival mechanisms. They are weapons of clarity. They expose intentions, dismantle lies, and allow you to finally disengage without guilt. Walking away isn't cruelty. Cutting ties isn't abandonment. It's refusing to participate in a distorted version of your own life. It's deciding that your energy, your peace, and your story are too valuable to lend to those who will twist them for convenience. The journey to that realization isn't easy. It takes courage to see people for who they really are, to feel the weight of their manipulation and still rise above without bitterness. But once you do, the freedom is profound. You stop reacting to their story and start writing your own. You stop giving power to those who never deserved it and begin living in alignment with the truth, dignity, and clarity that you were always meant to claim. So, if this resonates, if it hits that part of you that has been quietly questioning, doubting, and finally seeing, make a choice for yourself today. Subscribe to the channel to stay connected to the truth. Like this video to honor the clarity you've gained. Comment below to share your own revelations, and share this with someone who needs to wake up to the reality they've been avoiding. The story doesn't have to control you anymore. The power is in your hands. Take it, own it, and never let anyone distort it again. God bless you.